Good afternoon, everyone. You know, it's funny what you think in the moment. As I was walking up there, I should have been thinking about how I was going to start a presentation to 1,000 people, when actually what I was thinking was Candace has just says Tim Peake's in the building. And if I could get a selfie with him, because he's huge with kids in the UK, if I could get a selfie with him, my kids, I think I could really boost my credibility, all at a shared services conference. So it's funny what happens. Anyway, I digress. So let me try and get back to the presentation. So before I do my introductions, I'd actually like to start with a question for you. And it was a question which was really important to Cargill as we embarked on our finance strategy. And that question was, how many companies that outline a strategy actually achieve their intended outcome? Now, I'm going to do it old school. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. So you've got three options: less than 20%, between 20 and 50, and greater than 50%. So if I can ask, who thinks it's answer A, less than 20%? Okay. What about B, between 20 and 50%? Okay. And finally, C, greater than 50%. So we've got some. Well, in actual fact, the answer is less than 20%. And if I go back to 2019, when I was actually doing some research, what I found was that just 5% of companies will actually deliver the strategy they set out to accomplish. And whilst that was a pretty big surprise for me, 1 in 20 will actually deliver what they set out to deliver. While that was a surprise, the fact that the other 95%, they will under-deliver to some point, and the reasons for that aren't so surprising. I actually think that we could come up with a list relatively quickly. Now, I'm not going to ask you another question, but things like the strategy is vague. There's a lack of alignment. There's a lack of leadership. There's resistance to change, insufficient resources. There's various reasons why companies don't deliver what they set out to deliver. And so what I think is, it's not quite as much about the reasons why. I think what we should be trying to do is figure out, how do we learn from it, and how do we become the 5%? And so as we go through the next 20 minutes, I want to share with you a little bit about how Cargill tried to answer those questions. So let me say a little bit about myself. Chris Deery, I have been in finance for 30 years. I set off as a chartered accountant. I then worked for Schlumberger, moved from Schlumberger into Motorola. I then spent 7 years in Diageo, the drinks company, which was probably the height of my popularity with friends and family. When you're Scottish and you've got access to cheap drink or free drink, it's amazing how popular you are. That diminished pretty quickly when I moved to Shell, but it was a fantastic career move. I spent 9 years in Shell, and I joined Shell just as they were on their finance transformation journey, right from the very bottom of fourth quartile, truly bottom of fourth quartile, all the way through into world class. It was an amazing learning opportunity. And now I'm in Cargill, and I've been in Cargill. This is my 8th year in Cargill, and I'm the head of global finance operations. So what I want to actually kind of do is, over the 30 years, I've had the opportunity to study, many finance companies, and I think that when it comes to shared services, we've been doing very similar things, or at least we've been selecting from the same kind of catalogue of options. I want to maybe share some of what have been some of our biggest challenges in Cargill, and what were some of the game changers that set us on a better path. Now, it's my view in life. No ChatGPT was used in preparing this, whilst it was very, very tempting. But it's my view. And where I get quite excited when I was talking to people yesterday, some of you are just embarking on your journey, and for some, you've just started it. Hopefully there might be some ahas in there for you. And if not, I think it might be a useful therapy session for all of you, because I think we're all going through many of the same challenges and issues. Unless you're at PepsiCo, which was a pretty amazing story. That was quite incredible what they've achieved in 5 years. And if you notice, Ranjan has got a full head of hair, and I'm completely bald. And I think that might be a reflection of his shared services journey and my shared services journey. So, yeah. But, okay, so I'm going to cover 3 things. First of all, I'm going to talk about why it was so important for finance to set a vision and how we went about that. The second thing I'll cover is, historically, how did we go about our process data and technology? And then how did we change that so we could set ourselves off on a realistic path to delivering on that vision? And then thirdly, I would just want to talk about how important it was for us to listen to the feedback we were getting from the business and from finance if we were going to bring them along on the journey with us. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about Cargill. Some of you I know Cargill well. For others, let me say a little bit about it. Cargill, I think, is one of the most amazing companies in the world. I think we've got one of the most inspiring purposes to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. We've got an incredible CEO who lives and breathes that purpose. In terms of the size of Cargill, we're 155,000 employees. We're the biggest privately owned company in the world, and we are one of the biggest outright. We're in more than 70 countries, and we've actually been around for 158 years. Now, Cargill is made up of 4 big enterprises. All of them could be companies in themselves. The first is the agricultural supply chain. The second is food ingredients and bioindustrial. The third is animal nutrition and health. And the fourth, which actually isn't reflected up there, is protein and salt. And if I was trying to summarize on what Cargill does, and it isn't easy, but if I was trying to summarize, I would say we grow food, we make lots of different products, and we trade various different commodities. Now, if there's one takeaway from this slide, I would say when you see the level of diversification in Cargill, think about the amount of complexity that comes with that. Now, I might be pressing the button without realizing. So I mentioned my role as head of finance operations. We have a team of, it's now about 5,000. We cover pretty much every process in finance. That includes the ones that you would expect. It also covers things like tax, treasury, trade product control, management reporting. We're spread across mainly 7 centres. The global centre would be Bangalore. And then we've got 2 regional centres, Sofia and San Jose, and then 4 others which are more proximate to the areas they cover. And that is, we've got Krasnodar for Russia, Uberlandia for Brazil. We've then got Nanjing that covers Greater China and South Korea. And then finally, we've got Rosario, our oldest shared service centre, which covers Argentina and covers the rest of the Andean countries. Now, you'll see I've kind of got a couple of stats on that top right-hand side, and they're just a little bit of a teaser for what I'll come on to later. But, one of them is we have a track record of delivering between 8 and 10% efficiencies. And we've been around, our youngest centre is 8 years old, so we've been around for a while. And so to be still producing that type of efficiency, I understand is world-class. But it becomes tougher, and I'll come on to talk about that. You also see that for some of our processes, our penetration is pretty high. But let me come back and talk a bit more about that. For the moment, what I want to do is take you back. And I'll take you back to 2015, when we really started on this journey. Now, to paint a picture of what Cargill looked like back then, if you look at the locations, Cargill has 1,400 physical locations, and finance was spread across many of them, 450 plus. So we were pretty widespread. If you think about the way Cargill had grown over its first 150 years, we had more than 70 entrepreneurial businesses. They had autonomy to do what they needed to do to grow the business. And we as a company were hugely successful with that model. We had grown pretty steadily over those 150 years. But think about each of them was able to create their own people, process, data, and technology. So again, think of the complexity that was building across those businesses. And if you look at it through the lens of technology, we had more than 70 ERPs, less than 20% was in SAP. And finance then wrapped a further 350 applications around that, 350 that we knew about. So there's a lot of complexity in there. When you then think about what that meant for our processes, I've just given you some indicators, but in credit to cash, 400 payment terms, 300 plus invoicing processes. In the procure to pay space, again, lots of payment terms, and most of our invoices were paper-based. From a record to report point of view, think about your period end close. Think about managing that timetable. We had 25,000 period end tasks, 1.5 million journals, and many of the journals that we were booking came after we closed the ledger. So a lot of activity was happening afterwards. And then 1.6 million reconciliations, all manually done. Excel spreadsheets, some customized tools, but pretty much all manually done. And then at the latter part of the month end, our management reporting was all Excel and PowerPoint based. And pretty much 80% plus was on the data collation, the creation of the packs. Very little at the back end on the analysis, because really what we needed to do was once we finished those packs, we had to start again. That was pretty much the way our month went. And if you look at that bottom stat, less than 5% was actually on shared services at that moment in time. Now, round about that time, we had a new CFO. He came in from the external world, and one of the first things he decided was we're going to start to use shared services more. So that was a non-negotiable. That had to happen. However, he recognized the culture in Cargill. He recognized that he was relatively new into the company, and so what he said is he's going to look to the teams to decide how we do that. And you can see that there were lots of opportunities for us, and we made quite a lot of progress from 2015 to 2018, back end of 2018, but it was tough. If you're leading finance operations, it was tough. Every decision was a debate. We were trying to figure out, how we, progress stuff in. And what we were finding was things were really starting to slow down as we got to around about the 2018 mark. And we realized that we had to take a step back. We had to pause and take a step back and think about what were the challenges that were holding back from making progress. And so we did that. And we saw some really big messages coming through for us. The first one was that finance really was operating as a number of silos. We had no integrated strategy that was binding us together. So we were operating as multiple different silos. And when you looked at how that was coming through in certain ways, we had hundreds of initiatives. We actually had no governance that actually allowed us to understand just how many initiatives we had, but we knew we had a lot. And I tried to reflect, some of the big ones that are up there. Like central finance. We had embarked on central finance before most companies had, and that was a typical example of something that could impact all areas of finance, but that's not the way we were set up. We weren't set up to really gain the synergies across them. Another strong message that came through for us was the rest of the company believed that finance had changed its operating model more than any other part of the company, and with that, they felt that we hadn't brought them along in the journey, and they didn't really know how to interact with finance. And so when we look at what that meant for our partners, finance had been the rock for our business for such a long time. Not only did they do all of the finance activities for them, they often picked up a lot of the non-finance activities that didn't have a home. So when all of a sudden they started to see their finance resources move into shared services, and they felt they hadn't been brought along in the journey, that was a problem for them. They were struggling to understand where we were going. And then the final point was our finance function was saying, look, we're feeling fatigue with the constant change. And it wasn't the fact that we were changing, it was more that they didn't know where we were going. And because they didn't know where we were going, they were asking the question, when is this going to stop? And so it was clear that we needed to do a rethink. And that was around about 2019. And at that point, we actually had a new CFO. And he came from within Cargill. He'd been in Cargill for many years. He had been leading one of the big enterprises, and he came in to lead finance. And relatively early on, he decided that we were going to embark on our first ever finance strategy. You know, in all of those years, we'd never had a finance strategy, so we were going to embark on that strategy. Now, I was heading up finance operations. I was also the GPO for a number of the global process owner for a number of our processes. And I got the pretty unique opportunity to lead the strategy, which was really exciting. You know, leading the strategy for one of the biggest finance functions in the world was pretty amazing. And also, you know, to some of the points I was listening to earlier on from the panel, you know, choosing someone from finance operations to lead finance's strategy was pretty cool. And so I was excited. I was excited about his vision to put in place a business-led world-class finance function. I was fully bought in. But if I take you back to that first question, you know, it was a little bit scary because 5%, you know, the chances of succeeding are pretty slim. So I was a bit scared by that, but I was excited by it as well. And so building on his vision, you know, my vision was to be the 1 in 20. And so that was pretty exciting. So it was around about that point that we chose to partner up with Deloitte, and Deloitte were going to help us work our way through the strategy. And the first thing we did, recognizing the challenges that I shared with you earlier on, we wanted to make sure we developed an approach that addressed those challenges, because if we didn't, we were going to step into the same problems yet again and make the same mistakes that we'd made previously. And so our first step, and it's interesting to see Samir and some of the other team here, you know, our first step was to spend quite a bit of time with the CFO. So we spent time helping him develop his aspirations for finance. And over the course of that time, he developed 7 points that made it very clear to him what he saw as the way he wanted finance to go forward. And why that was so important was by doing that, we had established the tone from the top. It was so important to us. He was excited and he was ready to lead finance through the strategy, and we had that tone from the top guaranteed. That was the first thing, and that was a game changer for us. The second thing was we then brought the FLT together, and rather than jumping straight into the strategy, we again took the time to work with that FLT, who were fantastic leaders but had been working in silos. We took the time to do things like put the governance in place. What was the role of the CFO? What was the role of the FLT? What was my role? What was the role of Deloitte? And then we asked them to go away and create the rules of the road. What were the behaviours they were going to show, and that they were then going to make sure the team would show, that would allow us to move forward as one integrated finance function. And that was a second game changer for us. If I was doing this again tomorrow, those would be 2 steps that I would absolutely make sure that we did, because I think that set the tone and set us in the path that we then moved on to. Now, as we stepped into the strategy, you know, we, through various conversations, identified 21 strategic questions that the FLT felt needed to be answered if we were going to head forward in a clear way. 21 seems a lot, but they were really important that we tackled them. These were ones that we created over the course of those initial conversations, and we stepped into, you know, making sure we answered them. And to give an idea of the level of detail we went into, we created a panel for each of those 21 questions. And that panel basically captured the question, it captured the problem statement, it then highlighted what other companies were doing in that space, and then it gave what were some of the options we had, what was our recommendation, and then what would be the initiatives we would have to execute on to be able to deliver that. And we then took the FLT painstakingly through every single one of those panels and made sure that we then made a number of decisions. And some of those decisions were pretty big. So with those 21 questions, I think around 5 of them were related to finance operations. One of them was, how are we going to use finance operations going forward? And remember all the challenges that we had had. This was so important to us that we got that clarity. They decided that we would move 1,500 roles, 1,500 further roles to finance operations over the next 18 months. That was so important for us because that meant we were going to move from lots of partial processes to full end-to-end processes in finance operations. So they were the types of decisions we were making. We then stepped from there into how we were going to execute. And again, I don't have time today to go through the detail of it, but one of the key things for us, we decided we were going to put a finance transformation office in place. We also decided that based on the initiatives that we had, we were going to put our own data and technology team in place. We believed we needed that to be successful. And so that allowed us to move forward. And I just want to give you an idea of the strategy for finance. It's iterated over the course of the years, but our overall strategy is to be a strategic driver of business performance powered by 1, high-performing teams, and 2, strong foundational processes and controls. And we, from a finance operations point of view, the shared service side, we then built upon that. We know partnering and delivering quality performance. We know delivering well-controlled processes is our license to operate. But we want to move beyond that. You've heard that message multiple times today. We want to make sure that we're delivering. We've got so much data at our fingertips. I believe we are the catalyst for so much of what happens across the company. And we need to make sure we're developing the insights and the solutions that can drive more value for the company. But if I take you back to that top statement, there's 3 points I want to make, and they're all built into that statement. 1 around driver of business performance, 1 around high-performing teams, and the other around foundational process and controls. And let me start with the latter. So I showed you the picture earlier on. We had been very fragmented in the way that we dealt with process data and technology. We knew we had to address that as part of the strategy if we were going to be successful. And we did 2 things. The first thing we did was bring every single initiative under 1 program, and we called that our global finance platform. And we were able to see everything that was in there. And then what we did was, once we had captured all of them, we then developed, we needed to know, are we going to continue them? Are we going to pause them? Are we actually going to stop some of them? And so we built a set of criteria with Deloitte. We built a set of criteria that would allow us to ask the consistent question of each and every initiative that we had in there. And again, we painstakingly went through all of them and decided what we were going to do with them. And where we felt great was we actually identified some that we were going to stop. I think finance finance often takes on too much, and I don't think we're very good at stopping things. So we felt great about the fact we identified some initiatives that we were going to stop or pause and create the space for the things that we really felt mattered. Now, once we had done that, we needed to know how we were going to sustain it. How are we going to sustain having 1 program for finance? And so we did 2 things. First of all, we created a steerco at the top where we took multiple members of the FLT, brought them together, and they were going to lead and own the program. They also held the strategic spend, so they decided how that would be prioritized out. And they made sure they were connecting the dots, ensuring there were business cases behind every initiative that we took on. That was very different from the way we had been operating previously. And the second thing we did was we created working groups, process working groups, for every process we ran. So an example would be record to report. We had a process working group led by a GPO. It had operations in there, it had data and technology in there, it had continuous improvement, and anybody else we believed that we needed to be in there, so they owned the strategy for R2R and all of the initiatives that needed to be executed on. And we did that for every single process, and we made sure that the steerco was then ensuring they were connecting the dots across them. That still exists today. Now, over the course of the last few years, we've tried to adapt and improve it, but it still exists today. And again, when I think back to the strategy, that was a game changer for us. The last thing I want to cover, I mentioned the driving business performance and our talent. From a business relationship point of view, one thing I didn't say earlier was when Deloitte partnered with us, the first thing we asked them to do was go out and interview 40 business leaders. And they went out and did that. And they got a lot of feedback. Some of the feedback was positive, but a lot of it was pretty strong, constructive criticism. and they developed that into themes, and it was highly valuable for the FLT and for us as we thought through the strategy. But there was one other really important point in us going out and taking that step with them. We needed to recognize that we hadn't brought them along in the journey previously, and this time, we were changing again, but we wanted them to believe that this time it would be different. It would be business-led, and we would bring them along in the journey. And so that first point where we went out and gained their feedback, I think really brought them in. Now, we needed to make sure we sustained it. And if I give an example, in terms of the operating model, I mentioned how complex it had been. If you look at our operating model in finance today, we have moved from a geographical model to an enterprise model. So if you go from our finance business partners and you actually work your way all the way back into finance operations, wherever we can have a team that is enterprise focused, or even better, one of the businesses within there, that's what they are. And we keep trying to improve and iterate that model, but that showed our commitment to being business-led. The last point I want to make is, from a talent point of view, by taking that step back and thinking about, the impact on our talent, what we realized was when we started this journey in 2015, for many, many years, we had asked our finance teams to be generalists. We'd asked them to be experts in every process, plus more. All of a sudden, we had started picking activities from them and moving them to finance operations. And over the course of time, what we were really asking them to do was go from being a generalist to a specialist. But we hadn't helped them develop to that space. And so by taking that step back and going through the strategy, we realized we needed to take a different approach. And so we've put so much more focus into how we help get them there. The finance competency model, the development interventions that need to be in place. And we've seen for many, they were able to make that jump to our new model. For some, it wasn't the right model for them, and they chose a different path. And that also meant that we had to then externally bring in people who could work in that new model. And even today, the talent strategy continues from back in that day. So this year, we're actually refreshing our finance competency model. And it's going to be really, really interesting because it's not just about building a competency model for today. We know finance is changing rapidly. In 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 4 years' time, finance will look different from how it looks today. So building a competency model that recognizes how we're changing over the next few years is going to be a really fascinating piece of work. Now, when I think about the work that we did, if I think of where we were in 2019 and the work that we then did, how did that impact finance operations? Well, first of all, when you look at our penetration, we are now close to 100% in some of our main processes. Do I believe that's the journey or the path we were on before the strategy? I don't. And so that's been one of the big benefits. And I mentioned that it's allowed us to bring in full processes, end-to-end processes. And when you have got full end-to-end processes, the difference to your performance is pretty significant. If I think about that first row from a compliance point of view, I believe we've got one of the best credit teams in the world. We consistently outperform the market. And we have built, a large I2P team, and a large invoice-to-pay team that has got the skill and the specialism to identify duplicate payments, fraudulent payments. And then if you look at the balance sheet reconciliations, 1.6 million reconciliations, when you move 60% of them from manual to automated, that's a lot of control and resource that you've shifted. And then if you think about it from an effectiveness point of view, our accounts receivable has come down considerably. In a company of Cargill's scale, when you think about the impact on our working capital, and if you apply, a 7% WACC rate to that working capital movement, that's a lot that flows through to your bottom line. We also, from an on-time payment point of view, have gone from the low 50s to the high 80s, and we sustain that every single month, have done for the last couple of years. And one of the biggest changes has been in how we close the books. We used to close the books in 6-ish days with a lot of activity after that. We now close the books in 4 days. FTR is first time right. 94% of those reporting units that were closed in 4 days were correct. No more adjustment needed. So it means there's not a lot of activity is going on to get the books right after the close. and it allows us to jump straight into consolidation and reporting and getting the insights to the people who need it. I just want to share some other big stats for finance operations in terms of what we've delivered over the last few years. That first stat is basically saying that from pre-migration to where we are now, we've taken out about 63% of the cost. Again, it's a lot. When you think the improvements we've made in the effectiveness, taking out that level of cost is pretty significant. If I jump to the one, 25 million, I showed you earlier on, we have got a track record of delivering 8 to 10% efficiencies. And so over the last 3 years, we've delivered more than 25 million. And then one of the things I feel pretty proud about is if you look at that last stat, in locations like Costa Rica, and San Jose, and Bangalore, and so on, where it's really competitive, we often see that our attrition rates are about 5% less than our competitors. So we're clearly doing something right from an employee value proposition. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time. There's just a few things I wanted to talk about in terms of looking ahead. The first thing, and it's been a consistent message all day, it's tough to keep delivering 8 to 10% year on year on year. My team keep telling me we've squeezed the lemon dry. So it's so important for us that we keep moving up that value curve, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be seen to deliver as much as we can on behalf of the businesses, and I believe the businesses want us there. But if we keep stripping 8 to 10% out, it gets harder to do that because you're cutting your capacity. The other thing for us, if we're going to get there, is we're putting central finance in place. We are ahead of most companies. Central finance is now our single source of data. There's not very many who have actually got to that place. We're on a pretty aggressive ERP journey, and we're putting a number of other things in place that will change the way that we do our group reporting, our management reporting, our stat reporting. There's a lot going on. So how we partner with the process data and technology teams, how we partner with CI, with IT, is going to be really crucial to our success. And in the past, we might have all had slightly separate agendas, slightly separate numbers. That can't be going forward. We've got one strategy, one value case, and one set of initiatives that we drive together. And then the last point I want to cover, it's something that's come up a number of times today, and it highlights maybe a slightly controversial message that I would give to this audience. Maybe not, you can tell me after. You saw our penetration rates. We've moved the bulk of the transactional stuff. So the shared services story no longer resonates with finance. That's not a message. If you go into the leaders of the enterprises in finance, shared services doesn't resonate with them. The story that we're now trying to tell is that, over the course of time, while finance thought that what we were doing was, operating processes, well-controlled processes at low cost, what we actually were doing was that plus. That plus any opportunity we were trying to get up the value curve, and we were starting to take on more higher-end finance roles. And what that was allowing us to do was create large-scaled, highly skilled teams. A lot of people who have got both the aspiration and the ability to step into FP&A roles, controller roles, planning and reporting roles, tax, treasury, that's where they want to get to. And when you look at the scale that we've created and the talent that we've got in place, we believe that the next way we can add value to finance's strategy is by being that capability center for the rest of finance, and we want them to tap into those skills. Okay, I have a number of lessons. I have a feeling I'm out of time. Am I okay for time? So what you don't know is once the clock changes from green to red, these 4 glass panels, they actually become trapdoors. And Carrie's got a button, which at some point she's just going to gobble me up because I've overdone my time. Okay, so I had some lessons that I wanted to capture. I think when I was creating the slides, I just got a little bit too excited. I hadn't presented for many years, and someone kindly told me yesterday I should have had 3 points on there. So I'm going to cover just a couple. I think the couple that are most important to me. The first one is the tone from the top, the sponsorship from the top. I alluded to it earlier. I've operated in situations where the tone was very, very clear. And what it meant was you decide whether you want to be part of it, and then everybody moves to execution. That's it. I've also operated in a situation where the message isn't so clear, and people then spend time trying to figure out what the message is. They then decide, they're then trying to figure out, do they want to be part of it? And how long might they resist it? And I think the difference between the two is 3 or 4 years. That's how big it is. And maybe the last point I'll cover is that last one, tackling the brand issue. We've talked a lot about brand today. You know, invoice to pay went from low 50s to high 80s, as you saw earlier on, and also took $70 million out while they were on that journey. That's an incredible story. But if you're not out there telling that story to the business, their perception of your process is based on the noise. If things don't go well, that's their perception, that's their reality. So I would encourage you to make sure that you're out there and telling your story regularly, telling it over and over and again. Have the metrics, have the facts, and share that with them so that's their reality. It's pretty demoralizing for your teams when the perception is different. Okay, last question. I guess the big question, where are we the 5%? With a tough lens, I'm a grumpy Scottish accountant. With a tough lens, I would say not yet. We've achieved so much over the last 4 years, but we've still got so much to do. The most important thing is I truly believe we are on a path to becoming a world-class function, and we feel really, really good. We feel very proud about what we've achieved today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much for bringing the Scottish humour and not the Scottish grumpiness.
I have no idea if anybody got that humour, but...
In the interest of time, because we are running slightly behind, the Q&A will be up in our studio when you go on, but congratulations. Fantastic story and all you've accomplished the last 4 years, and you're right there at the top of finance now. I mean, that is, according to our latest survey, about 91% of finance in shared services, and you've achieved that. Incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Candice.